Hi, I'm Teresa Coenen with Stitch and Tree Quilts, and this is row 2 of our quilt, COVID Friends Tribute Quilt. The row 2 alternate block, Big Day, is a block that celebrates weddings or anniversaries and some of those missed big days that we have during COVID. For this block, you can use directional fabric for both the half square triangle and for the actual bow tie itself. You just have to be cautious how you place them on your fabric. You can also choose to, if you like, make your squares be 2 different colors. I know that Pat, who did pattern testing with us, chose 3 different colors for her Big Day block because she missed 3 weddings this summer as a result of COVID. When cutting the units, I like to use, because we have to cut a 7/8, a 3 7/8 inch unit, I like to use a Marty Michelle square up tool that has very easily seen 1/8 inch marks. It makes it easy for me to cut those 7/8 of an inch. And then I like to use a half square triangle from Marty Michelle, and any half square will do, to engineer those corners so that I don't have the 3/8 inch overlap. Makes it a little easier when working with my blocks. As far as fabric choices are concerned, this is my bright batik with a black background. And again, you can choose any fabric you like. You can even choose a larger print, but I wouldn't choose too large of a scale of a print in this area unless you can get it to look like it belongs together in a bow tie. So here is my bright batik. This one happens to be my bright basic, and this shows that you can use a print. I kind of fussy cut that print so it'd be similar, so that it looks like maybe a fabric bow tie that would be nice and bright. And you would have to be cautious because, again, like here I have those orange flowers that move into a turquoise flower, and depending on where I make my cut on the fabric, I might have had a piece of fabric that looked mostly turquoise and didn't have any orange, and it would look a little lopsided as a bow tie. You can also see here I chose to make my background fabric, even though it's directional, kind of go all sorts of different directions. Here is my deep and rich basics and blenders, and then my deep and rich batik. And that also has quite a bit of print to it, so I had to be cautious to make sure that both sides of the batik kind of had the same coloration. So that's kind of important when you're doing that. The other important piece when you're piecing is to make sure that you're pinning and getting those points to match up so that the center of the bow tie ends up looking like a square. That's kind of a critical part of this. Step 1 calls for you to take the 2 half squares, stitch them together, and press them open. And here you can see that for my block, I chose to fussy cut, or close to fussy cut, so I'd have the same angles so that I'd get that nice orange flower in there. And those half squares, I've stitched them together. To press them open, you first would finger press that open, and then set. Now, oftentimes with half squares, we press to the dark side of the fabric, but in this case, we want to press them open so we have as little bulk as possible out here in this outer part of our seam. So you'll do that first with both of those half square units. Step 2 tells you to use a ruler and a pencil to mark a diagonal line on the wrong side of the fabric squares. Another way to mark those fabric squares is to take your fabric square and fold it in half with wrong sides together and press that seam so that you can see that pressed point. You're going to take those fabric squares and you're going to place them in the corner of the background fabric, stitch diagonally trim, and then press to the outside. Another reason why I like to use the press method for that line is that it's already worked its way into pressing to the outside. It makes it nice and easy for me. So I'm going to go ahead and put those through my machine, stitching on that pressed mark line now. Once you have those squares pieced into the corners of your unit, you will trim at 1/4 inch, and you can just use a pair of scissors, or if you prefer, you can use a mat and a ruler and a rotary cutter to cut 1/4 inch from the seam. Either way, you've got a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance there. With that 1/4 inch seam allowance, the pattern calls for you to press to the outside. So you'll set the seam and then hold the iron in place for 5 seconds. Moving on to step 3, you'll do something very similar using the half square units from step 1. Again, I just like to press that diagonal seam in place, and I will place it on that half square unit and stitch diagonally on both pieces. Just as we did in step 2, we're going to trim 1/4 inch from the seam, set the seam, and press to the outside. In step 4, we'll be taking the half square unit from step 3 and the square from step 2 and putting them together. It's important to match these seams here. So when I put them together, I fold them over like a sandwich. I match those half squares up using my eyes to see where the seams meet and using my fingers to feel where they meet. And then it is important to drop a pin in so that that doesn't wiggle for you. As you stitch that, it's going to want to push down and push out of place. If you need to, you put a pin in the top part of that unit as well, and let the machine ease any bulk in if necessary. In step 4, the pattern calls for you to press the seam open. That's to reduce the bulk here where those points meet. So you begin by finger pressing, and then just set your iron in place for a period of 5 seconds or more. The longer that it sits there, of course, the more secure that seam is set. Again, I finger press to open the seam. And use my small iron. That's one of the advantages of that small iron, is it's just so easy to handle, to go ahead and press that seam open. In step 5, the pattern calls for you to match the center seam and those side seams of those units. And the first thing I will do is I will drop a fork pin, which is a 2-headed pin, or a 2-pronged pin, if you will, that you can place on both sides of that seam, allowing that seam to stay put. Then it's important that I match up that half square there and drop a pin, match up the other half square and drop a pin, and then slowly I'll stitch that 1/4 inch seam, being mindful not to let it push through those points right there. In fact, I'm going to move that pin ahead of the seam just a little bit more. Step 5 calls for you to press this center seam open as well. You'll use the same method of finger pressing first, and then holding your iron in place for 5 seconds. And there we have the big day block. If you have any questions along the way, give me a call, send me an email, do a post on our group Facebook page, and we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can to answer any questions that you might have. I thank you for joining us and have a blessed day.